morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning. Thank you. Keith from the Faculty Development Team. Welcome to Primetime at BU Library. Primetime celebrates learning beyond the classroom through the experiences and accomplishments of faculty, staff, and students, and is a collaborative project between Friends of the BU Library, Faculty Development, and many other offices on campus. Presentations are recorded and are available in the BU Digital Library, which can be found on the library's homepage. Faculty, $250 Library Research Prize application for this year is open. As you're winding up the semester, if you see examples of outstanding research with excellent use of this library's resources, please encourage your students to apply. Due date is February 15th. Information is available on the library website or from your library liaison. On Tuesday, December 2nd, Akron Scholars, Dr. Adam Johnson and Zachary Barrett will present their summer research project entitled How We Think When We Think About Human Origins. Today we welcome Dr. Julia Moen and student Sarah Brown. I said that? Brown. Thank you. From the Social Work Program as they present a Ready for Prime Time, which discusses our responsibility in preparing and educating students about personal safety in the community. In their presentation, is it time to evaluate our student safety in the field? Practicums, internships, service learning, and TCA. Let's welcome them this morning.
Thank you for coming. It's a busy time for Prime Time, and we realize that we're competing with the International Photo Fair, and some of our social work majors are out in the community, but I'm glad you're here. This for me is a celebration of an ending of a project, which was a book that we published called Social Work Field Directors. And it started 2 or 3 years ago where I do training for field educators who run the field practicum programs across the country. There's usually about 30 or 40 field educators at these trainings, and it's an all-day pre-conference training at the baccalaureate programs meeting. And we took our PowerPoint slides and we made a book, so that was pretty exciting. We didn't realize how much work that was, but with my colleagues, Miriam Raskin and Cindy Hunter, we had a really wonderful collaborative, and then we invited authors to speak to specific topics that we knew were critical for students. And so it really was about my love of the students and their having a good social work education, especially their practicums, which is the thing they remember most from their education. They talk about that. So, and keeping them safe in the practicum was one of the chapters. There's a couple other chapters that are kind of interesting that we fund a dialogue about with my colleague, one on gatekeeping. How do you keep students out of a profession if they're not ready, or how do you get them ready? So that's a pretty interesting chapter. And the other one is legal and ethical responsibilities. But I chose this chapter because it seemed fairly straightforward and practical, and I wanted to kind of learn together what's happening at Bethel and maybe share some of our ideas with you, and then also have you respond to that. So with that, I want to really express my appreciation to the people who helped make this project come together. First of all, Sharon Leiter actually wrote the chapter, and I was the liaison to her chapter, so I spent a lot of time with her, help shaping that and working with this chapter on safety and risk management. But she really is the author of the material that we're presenting today. And by the way, I'm Julia Moen from the Social Work Department, and
Sarah Bryan, I'm a senior in the department.
Yeah. So Sharon Leiter, Cindy, and Miriam Raskin, I want to thank my colleagues who helped edit and publish this book together. Deb Harless, who supported me in my scholarship. Amy, Sandy, and Corey, who care so deeply about the students that this chapter is also a reflection of who they are and our work together in the social work program. Jim Koch, as the counseling center director, who helps take our counseling staff at Bethel and work with students who've experienced trauma or violence in a variety of ways. Who come to the counseling center. Andy Johnson, who's walked with me through a publication himself, and his book is Springer publication. It'll come out in the spring, but him and I have been bumping into each other along the way, seeing how things were going. Amanda Nelson and Nora Bielen, both were student teaching assistants on the courses that I teach, so that helped me with my academic writing when they were helping with courses. And then Sarah Brown, so she helped me put this presentation together today. I've also had a lot of help from the library professionals and staff and professors Arlene and Will and Rhonda. Just some obscure questions that come up about finding articles in literature and how to cite things that I got stumped on. So they rescued me out of some pretty tight timelines and whatnot. And Jamie, I put Jamie on here because she teaches our self-defense course. And this chapter is really important to me because when my daughter, who's now 24, went away to college, I hired Jamie to meet with my daughter and two of her friends to go through a safety training. And I thought, well, if I'm doing that for my daughter, then certainly I would want to do that for all of our students. I want our students to feel like they can handle themselves out in the community, out on college campuses, how to have the basic knowledge. So I thought, that's why I like this chapter on safety. And Jamie is amazing about helping students get strong in their bodies and feel strong out in the community around safety issues. So I want to thank her for what she does. Okay, so this is a chapter that we're reflecting on in the presentation today. And the book itself is a desk reference for social work directors across the country. Nothing's been written for field directors, so we're really excited that they have this on their desk. And there are 800 programs in the country that potentially will have this book. And we're about 600 sales already, so that's pretty exciting. So Hunter, Moen, and Raskin and our contributing authors have provided essential knowledge and skills, and we really dug into the literature. It's not like the PowerPoints anymore. It really was. We're looking at the research and what is the research telling us about policies and how to shape field programs. And then we have a website that goes with the book that I'll turn on at the very end. So just to introduce this topic, really verbal and physical aggressions are realities in the social work profession. And in fact, when I opened up the newspaper this morning, I saw that nurses are also kind of being threatened in their hospital environments. That was in the Star Tribune today. So I think it's a reality of some of the other professions besides social work, but I'm zeroing in on our social work profession. So, and field directors who really are positioned to prepare students and agencies for this getting ready to deal with violence and aggression out there, or even not out there. Sometimes it happens right on campus as well. But field directors are educating students about personal safety issues, and they also provide resources to programs for assessing risk management and factors. So this presentation will address best practices on institutional policies, on incident reporting, on site-specific training. We have material that's really very excellent that can be used across other disciplines, and ways to deal with student safety at Bethel University. I also want to put a plug in for Andy Johnson and Sandy Trout have done this MVP, which is prevention training for violence, and that is another kind of model for training, and I hope we can keep that back in our curriculum. So, yes. Whoops. Here we go.
Some definitions we are working from is that violence includes actual and attempted physical harm to a person and or property, and violence is interchangeable with physical and psychological assault, and psychological assault and aggressions are also interchangeable.
So just to reflect on the literature that we have in social work, there's over 20 studies that have shown that acts of violence against social workers is happening, and there's insufficient safeguards, and that's over the last 20 years. The National Association of Social Workers, which is our professional association, has surveyed our members, and that was a 10,000 person survey. 86% of social workers have been victimized by psychological aggression, and 30% by physical assault. That's a pretty high number. That's a 2006 study, so that's a little old, but that's what we have so far. Baccalaureate programs, which there are 500 of them, and this survey was about a 60% return rate. 26% of programs have had students who have experienced physical and verbal violence during the previous 5-year period. I haven't collected statistics for our social work program, but I could tell you that on an average, I make an incident report at least once every other year, and there's usually 2 or 3 things that come up that students discuss that impact them, and Sarah will speak to that.
A little bit more on an international level. Research from the US and the UK highlight trauma and costs that result from insufficient worker protections. These are like medical expenses, emotional trauma, disability, and sometimes even death.
So why is this a topic that we're speaking to? I think we have raised consciousness of violence in the United States, and that comes from some pretty high profile and tragic incidents. First of all, like the Columbine, September 11th, Virginia Tech massacre in 2007. Gabe Zimmerman, who was a social worker and an outreach worker for Gabrielle Giffords in 2011. And then the Sandy Hook Elementary shooting. Now, obviously there's been things that have happened since 2012, but the research we have in this chapter gets us to 2012, so that's where we're at. So there is a raised consciousness that things are potentially unsafe in the community, and we have to be ready to respond and prepare people for the risks. So we also wanted to think about the international context, and I want to just pause for a minute and realize that there's violence in a global context. There's civil war, there's terrorism, and I just think of just even how that violence impacts our colleagues here at Bethel, and many of us who know about people who have died from acts of violence in the world. So I just want to pause and think that this is part of our world, that there's violence. But in social work, we do have South Korea, Australia, Great Britain, and Canada, who have all done some research to look at what is happening in their countries, including funding for lock systems, circuit television, first aid for workers, risk reduction training in Australia, and the government documentation. Great Britain tends to be highly regulated, so of course the Brits would have some government regulation about violence against social workers. And then Canada is recognizing, this is a 2005 study, again it's a little old, but they've recognized also that they're not prepared yet for dealing with client violence in their social work curriculum. So that's the international context. So we wanted to make bring some remarks to this topic because there's a lot of ambivalence about and emotion and controversy about safety issues. So we wanted to bring the remarks that Sharon Leiter has garnered over the years as a field educator, both from conferences and regional consortium, and she's out in the East Coast. But this would be pretty typical of what we would find, and maybe some of us have heard these comments in our own world. The comments come from students.
So as a student, some of the things that I would hear would be, I'm afraid to sit down in my client's home. There are safety issues at my placement. My field instructor seems bothered by this. I'm ashamed for asking these questions. And I'm also afraid to use my own car to transport clients.
So students will make comments that are minimized by the either supervisor or by the faculty member, or it's like there's anxiety when you start talking about this. And here's what the faculty say. Okay, they do say this. Oh. Okay, professionals. So just be calm. If you're not calm, it's your own fault if something happens. You should be caring about your client, not about yourself. Your client threatened to kill you. Oh, I didn't think that would happen. So again, I think it's kind of embarrassing to think that these comments are made, but in fact, these are comments that have been garnered over the years by clients, by students, and by professionals. And then finally, administrators, both at the agencies and in programs. Administrators will say, oh, don't open a can of worms. This may make our university look bad or be liable for student safety. Just let it go. Or the university will say, don't scare away potential recruits. Or from a social work program, we don't want people going to social work if they think they're going to be not safe. And then finally, new social workers should get their own training. And another comment would be, this is not the school's job, and it's not the agency's job. So whose job is it? And that's where professional leadership is needed. So, a national study, this is the same study referred to earlier, the survey of the social work professionals, 10,000 respondents. they have said this is a really issue of workforce retention, so that if we don't prepare workers for job safety issues, then we won't be able to retain our workforce. So a profession cannot successfully retain its workforce when issues of personal safety go unaddressed. So that was kind of the professional leadership needed by the profession. Then social work programs have really stepped in to provide this leadership by collaborating with agencies, police departments who come in and do training. That was one of the first things we did here at Bethel, was we actually had police officers come in and do some training. Field faculty, students, field instructors of social work programs also recognize that supervisors are in fact responsible for the safety of students. That's an ethical obligation that we have. So if we're not taking care of their safety and their well-being, then we can be held responsible. So that is an important thing to know about why this professional leadership is needed. So social workers, faculty, educators, agency workers are responsible for socializing students into our profession. That may be true of other professions, nursing, education, ministerial ministries. Proper instruction and effective agency policies is part of that, and helping students develop their own commitment to their own safety and well-being, and gain an awareness of their own personal vulnerability. So that is really critical, is that they need to know how to manage themselves and how to take care of themselves in the world.
So the National Association of Social Workers does have guidelines for safety in the workplace. And their little section says, schools of social work are responsible for ensuring that social work students are educated about concepts and techniques related to safety, as well as supervised in safe environments.
So that's the professional association that guides our practice. And Code of Ethics is another place that really we have to attend to our Code of Ethics, and it's one of our mandates professionally as well as the educational world.
And currently there's no specific language in the Code of Ethics that identifies safety issues. And the author of the chapter of the book that we're focusing on suggests adding this section. It says, social work administrators should take reasonable steps to ensure that adequate agency or organizational resources are available to provide training and supervision to reduce risk to workers, students, and staff in the environment.
So this is the exciting slide for me. The profession of social work has its accreditation body, and it does not require that there's any safety issues addressed in our accreditation standards, and that's the 2008 accreditation standards. Now, we've started a new draft of a new set of standards that will get published in 2015, so next spring we will have new standards. And as a result of this chapter and the work of our book, we have really stepped into this as a proposed change for the accreditation standards, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But in spite of not having any standards, so field directors have been providing training. They're asking the questions like, why are we placing students in a practicum, or why are we sending students to a TCO site, or why are we sending students to the community that don't have any safety policies in place, or that don't have some prep by the agency and by the campus. So field directors want to teach students about safety, but how do you find a balance on this tough topic and not communicate your own fears? You don't want to raise the alarm, but you also want to be responsible and take it seriously. So the field directors have been in an influential position with both the university and the community to develop policies for the programs, to advocate for agencies and organizations to have their own policies. And this has been kind of fun because we've seen people ask us, what should we be doing, and how can we be better at this, and how should we respond to this, and what kind of email should we send out? So they've been really in a communication collaboratively to how to address safety. And then finally, just including safety content in the curriculum. That was started in our social work program about 10 years ago, and Corey Hobbins did an excellent job of really shaping that and developing that further in her tenure as field director. So field directors are cognizant of what the agencies are doing, so that we actually ask our agencies when we approve them for a site, do you have any safety training as part of your orientation? And yes or no. So at least we know if they, and it brings that to their attention that yes, they do something, they talk about safety. And so maybe you can speak to that as part of
In my experience this year at my placement at St. Stephen's, we didn't have formal safety training, but it is something that my team talks about on a regular basis. So do you feel safe? Do you need somebody to come with you to this home visit? How do I handle this particular client? So it definitely has been an on-the-job training, but has been really useful.
Field directors are also asking about especially certain sites that are more high risk, like child protection and criminal justice and family welfare. They'll ask about technology such as beepers, about cell phones, about transporting clients. That's a very unique kind of situation that needs to be clarified carefully, because I've actually supervised somebody whose client tried to jump out of the car while the car's moving. So, yeah. And then working with the police and state prosecutors to notify employees about how to request police assistance or file charges. So we had an incident with one of our students a couple of years ago, and there was a police officer that came to campus and met with her and documented the incident after we had done our part to use our incident reporting form. So collaborating with the community to make sure that we're covering the safety of our students. This probably is one of the more rigorous and more helpful websites, and federal government sets up safety through the OSHA. They have actually workplace violence prevention programming, and these are the specific recommendations that they ask us to consider. One is developing specific procedures for home visiting, using buddy systems when around high-risk clients. So like when I talked to and interviewed some of our faculty, like the campus ministries people, they send students out in threes. I thought, oh, threes, not buddies, but threes. So I thought, okay, tell me about that. And then just informing clients and employees that violence will not be tolerated, having real clear statements, like Bethel has a very clear statement about violence not being tolerated on campus. And then requiring the reporting of all incidents. Once you start to require reporting, then it changes sort of the dynamics of how important it is to us. And these guidelines are written up by OSHA. So. Here's a suggested menu for training, and you can find all this material on our website. The book has its own website, and it's linked to all this stuff, including the OSHA material. So, but these are some suggestions about what to include in a safety training. And then an incident report. This is also best practices for incident reporting. And we have a form online that people can download for incident reports. So the who, the when, the where, the what and how, actions and outcomes, follow-up plan, including debriefing, counseling, referring to the counseling services as appropriate, to address the student impact, to manage any trauma, especially if this is a trigger for previous trauma the student might have had, which we may or may not know about. This can be, they can revisit any trauma. So, and then follow-up plan for agency and school, like reviewing what just happened. It's always in hindsight, you go, oh, we could have done this better, or what could we do to improve our process? So that's the other part of a good incident report plan. So I mentioned earlier that one of the significant policy changes that we're really excited about that came as a result of this publication is that in the spring, Leiter proposed changes to the next accreditation standards, and then in April, Cindy Hunter and myself and Miriam Raskin also tagged onto that proposed changes and had our own document written, which the Council on Field Education, which is part of the Council on Social Work Education, reviewed, and they discussed and they looked at what are the challenges of having some new language and accreditation standards. And right now, draft 3 of the accreditation standards, so the new language would help govern educational policies on student safety. That was our goal. And because right now safety is left to no one, it's not mandated. So the new language actually does say supporting student safety. So field programs have to discuss in their accreditation documents the following things. And so the new language added is student safety. So we're really happy that that happened at a big level. It's very exciting. We wanted to bring it home to Bethel, and this is not a, like I didn't do an exhaustive research study on Bethel, but I was gathering information by interviewing people informally, and I have to get out my keys because in one of my interviews I was talking about, oh, well, do you talk to students about like going out to their cars and, they're out in the community and how do they go out to their car and what do they do and what do they do with their cell phones? I mean, those are some basic things, and the person looked at me, who's a male, said, oh, that must be gender related. I said, yeah. So I know I was trained to walk to my car with my keys like this. I actually ran into somebody in the parking lot yesterday she was looking back at me, and then she says, oh, my husband told me I should just be watching. I said, yeah, cool, good, I'm glad you're watching. And I wasn't a threat to her, but I was glad she was watching. Anyway, so, how do we carry our keys? How do we, these are just basic tips, and people who are on their phones and not paying attention, so that's pretty common because a lot of us are very busy and we're very anxious people in the world. In the United States being one of the top anxiety, students have, 60% of students have anxiety. That's what the research shows about college students too. So, we have an emergency response plan if something happened on campus. Jim Koch told me that we have this. We actually have a crisis care team. There are 13 members. I don't know a ton about all this, but I just know it's there. So we'll be notified if something's happening or something will happen, and there's people in charge, administrators and whatnot. So there is a Bethel alert system.
It just basically lets students and faculty know about safety issues that are on campus by texting or emailing. Then the student handbook has some language in a section called Violent Acts and Threats that talks about on-campus safety, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute.
And then the places on campus I thought would be interesting to look at is the campus ministries. They have some safety trainings. It doesn't feel like it's formalized, but it's in there. And they're doing some things to prepare students for the community, TCO, and mission trips, especially the mission trip work. The TCO question, however, I do know of some students that were at a community agency site in North Minneapolis, and it's not about North Minneapolis, but I was aware that same week the students were going to North. There was 3 shootings outside one of our schools where our students do their field practicum. And so I was curious if she had learned about what was going on in the community that might impact them at their agency. So she didn't have any training and wasn't prepared for that. And then off-campus programs, I'm not as familiar with what happens with service learning, but I do know that the International Studies does their safety training in a variety of ways to prepare students for their international experiences. And then specific departments do have initiatives to help reduce risk of harm. And there are policies and protocols if or when something happens. So I know our department does. Jason Lee says they talk about it in the field seminar in the psychology department, but again, it's not really formalized, so that may be something to consider. I'm sure the nursing department and the education department would have something, but that would be worth investigating. So that's part of why we decided to present this, because we want to kind of ask ourselves some questions about this. So say something about the handbook.
Yeah, this is the section on violent acts and threats. I'll just read the first little part here. The university will not tolerate acts or threats of violence against members of this community or retaliation against any individual reporting a threat or act of violence. This prohibition includes verbal, nonverbal, or written actions and all forms of intimidation. So it seems that there is room for more specific language about what happens when you're off campus versus on campus, and what it means to be a member of the community, if that includes off-campus things and on campus.
And this whole policy is a kind of influx right now because we do have a new sexual assault mandate from the federal government, and all of us have probably seen that video, but there's some things that are really good about what's happening to really clarify and really handle this in a more serious manner in terms of incident reporting and who's handling it and all that. So I'm really happy about some of the outcomes of what Bethel's doing. I think that's going to improve. And Andy and I both work in the counseling center at Bethel, so we're very aware of what's happening with our students who are also our clients around safety, and it's not unusual to hear their stories, both on campus, off campus, on international studies, and it's very troubling But of course, we're sort of have a select population, so I don't want to alarm everybody, but it's there and it's sad. And if you can do anything to prevent this, let's keep trying, let's keep improving our practices. So, the social work department does its own specific training. It's a 3-hour training in their junior year right before they go out into the field. And then senior year, they do a little something too.
Yeah, in our field classes, there is a little bit of curriculum about safety and safety training. And the classes are designed in a way to share your safety concerns with each other and have mutual support and peer support in what happens in your field. And this year so far, there has been a few safety concerns with some of my classmates, like school violence, sexual harassment. So how do we address that? Yeah, almost a lockdown in a school. So just addressing those concerns in a more formal way.
Yeah, and then if there was an incident of violence, it's the responsibility of the field instructor, the faculty member, to talk to the student who's had the violent incident about their readiness to talk in a large group about that, and also whether we can help others who might be traumatized by what's happened to the student. So that's been a usual practice of mine, to really first keep the power with a student who's had that incident of violence, but then as they talk about it, if they choose to talk about it, then how does it impact the group? And we call that vicarious trauma, and it's something we have to also manage. It's the trauma of the trauma, and that happens. So we do have incident reports and field instructor emails, and also there's a link to all the material of these best practices on our website, which I'll show at the very end. But this is what we're doing, and again, want to thank Corey Hoppins for her leadership around this. We were doing things before, since about 2000 in the social work department, but it really got formalized with Corey. She actually makes the students sign this little form that they've been through the training, yes, and questions they have, and they sign it with data and everything. And then we also have in our field manual that field agencies have to tell us what they're doing around orientation, so we cover it in both places. So in conclusion, we really want to appreciate the measures that have been taken at Bethel to care for our students on and off campus. And then we also want to invite our faculty, our staff, administrators, and the students too, to consider how this community is addressing your safety, student safety, and ways that we can reduce the risk of physical, verbal, and psychological harm. So that's our goal, and we appreciate your interest and your time with us this morning to tease out this topic a little bit. So at that conclusion, we invite questions or comments. And while we do that, I'm going to power through at the end of each chapter, we have essential readings. So these are the essential readings, and then we have all the references. But I want to go back to this one. Yeah. So questions?
Julia, in the research you did and all the literature you gathered, did you find anything related to like social media and those? The reason I decided to come today was with our student teachers, I just learned about an incident where students were tweeting about this particular person.
Cyberbullying.
And it was very inappropriate. The school handled it. The school removed everything, and literally I heard about this 15 hours ago. So I haven't explored it within our own department, but did you find any, or do you have advice on what we should do? Clearly as an education department, we need to be looking at some things, but it sounds like some of your students are in schools.
Yes.
Particularly high schools, where you're going to have high school males towards a female student teacher or vice versa.
Yeah, in fact, one of the students who reported a sexual harassment was a school setting.
A school setting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cyberbullying, that's what I'm going to call it,
Okay.
or social media violence, which is a psychological assault.
Right, I figured it would fit with that.
And harm. I mean, even the chapter does have a little bit about that, but this, she did not zoom in on that as much as we would have liked. But if you pull up our website and you go to chapter 11, do you want to scroll down? This is her chapter.
Okay.
We have a field, it's called the Field Scholar, which is a free online, right here. Do you want to click on this Field Scholar? I would bet that there's an article or two in there about that, about cyberbullying. But yes, and I think Minnesota has some legislation that just came through. I do teach the policy course, so there was legislation 2 years ago about bullying, and that is covered in that, but I don't know what school districts have to form some guidelines around that, so it'll be interesting to see what that starts to look like. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, well, mostly just wanting to know if there's, but these links will be a great
Yeah.
support as we explore
Yeah.
that. What were you going to say, Andy?
There's also a training today between 1 and 2 online, and I think it's OJJP. I would have to look again, but it's free and it's co-sponsored by the FBI and other organizations, and it's on sexting and sextortion, which is related. So there are free webinars and things like that available. I have to go teach class here, and then, right after that, but if someone's interested, why don't you email me, and then I can email you the information to where people could then sign up if they want to, or at least take a look at it. It's from 1 to 2 p.m. today. It's free, which fits in my budget.
Your professional budget.
But yeah, I would definitely say have that student teacher look at the school policies because they are required. I was just student teaching as well.
Okay.
And I went through some of the training for that, and they're required by law to have a definition for it and recourses on what to take. So if they need to, they should definitely check with their.
Okay, well, and it sounds like it was handled immediately and taken care of, but it makes me realize as we work with our student teachers, I've never given advice to them on what they should do. Obviously, they should talk to their mentor teacher
Yeah.
first and then their supervisor from Bethel, but
And it's hard if a student teacher doesn't start right away when the school year starts. They might not
Exactly.
get introduced to those policies.
Yeah.
So I think maybe that's something that you say you need to ask about this before, for a manual or something.
yeah.
And I think that those are some of the protocols, I think, if we have the checklist of their orientation,
Right.
so I know that at least they've covered it, and I
Right.
maybe get more specific about cyberbullying, or I get more specific about people going in to and from their cars.
Right.
Because I know that, I live in St. Paul in the city, and so I know that this is something I've been very conscious of. But people who come from a rural community and they come into St. Paul, they don't always know all this sort of
Right.
street smart stuff, so I think it's our responsibility to just give them some of those tips.
I have a question too. My sister is a social worker, and I
Yeah.
came out of your program, but she is in the field, and the attitude that is given to your field experience for these students is what they get from their directors as well about, if she's been threatened before. She works in a group home with just males, and basically they say, he was just having a bad day. Even if he threatened to kill you, you just have to deal with it. So it seems like a systemic problem that's coming from much higher up. So I'm wondering what's being.
I agree
Well,
with
that's why we're talking about these policy changes and then
Right.
training, like people shouldn't minimize comments that workers have. That's a form of, it's not care, it's
Right.
not supporting your workers.
Well, I remember when my first death threat that was I was serious. I was assessing sex offenders, and I started getting these anonymous calls and death threats and things like that. And I don't think it was the head waiter, that little bistro, I think it was people I had been assessing, and so on, and that followed me into the next state. Those things. So sometimes these are not just like a bad day or a one-day affair. And then the first time too, someone threatens to kill you and it's face to face in the therapy office. That's pretty intimidating too, even if they're not serious or whatever. And I applaud what you're doing. I think this is wonderful. It's the direction the field really needs to go.
Well, and I really must credit Sharon Leiter for this, but she wants everybody to know. That's probably why she wrote the chapter for us. She wants to get the information out. So thanks, Andy, for your comments.
I just think one thing too is just helping discernment on this whole process. Just like with social media, but been in places where police will say, "You don't need to be here." Well, we're doing ministry here.
Mm-hmm.
We know it's risky. We know our risk.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I want you out of here. And and so how do we discern if we need to stay, or if we listen to the guidance of the police who are trying as far as in a piece like that?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, and so I don't believe there's you know, and how do you help
Yeah.
all of our students to discern and to work
Yeah.
through that? And it goes back to the comments of like,
Yeah.
well, he's having a bad day.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he just threatened to kill me too. That's another issue. So how do
One
we
of the
help?
things that I'm aware of from being a field director at Bethel is that there are agencies that they've been told, and they tell me that they're protected. So meaning they're protected by the gangs, they're protected
yeah.
by violence,
OSHA.
and nobody will set foot in that. That's sacred space in the community. So what your comment is about the police saying, well, you shouldn't be here, I would say, have you been told that you're protected? And if you are, then you have to trust that. As long as you still have done all the necessary training, preparation for training. And I think role plays, I think simulations are really, really helpful. I know it's easy to give out a handout on tip sheets, but anytime students can walk through a scenario, they can feel it in their body what they would do, and it really makes a difference. It's a very different experience. They can visualize it and get that in their system, especially if they've had previous trauma in the past. Other questions? Dave?
So, as an organization, it sounds like we might be heading towards a bit of vetting when we consider other organizations, or will there be, as a community, would we start a list, or if some place were to be known as not coming along with the standards, would we recommend those, or maybe
Interesting.
ask that they not be posted on our site?
That's really interesting. I think the way I would approach that question is that we need our community, and I don't want to eliminate what's out there, so that's why we take some responsibility for how students are prepared when they go out. So we've covered our responsibility to take care of the student. But yeah, we can ask them to provide some orientation to that. If they're not, especially if I'm thinking about a business, there is workplace responsibility that businesses have to protect worker safety. I mean, that's OSHA. They have to follow OSHA. So if people have policies in place at these agencies and aren't doing that, that would be concerning. That would be also maybe a point of teaching our students about ethical practices. But does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does in a bit, but of course I had a daughter that went through the social work program, and she would tell me about some situations that she would be involved in, and it's I know we do our part, but then you would hope that these organizations do their part to make sure that the students are safe.
Yeah. Well, we approve the site, so if they're not doing safety training, then our students will not go there.
I think that's true for international studies too. I don't think we have any kind of way to keep track of what kind of programs we're sending our students to, and some of these programs are absolutely unsafe. And it just seems like it's something we really need to look at better.
So that might be a policy consideration for Bethel
Right.
to do a little more careful investigation of where we're sending our students and have they address safety issues. That's the example I gave you about North Minneapolis, and not to target North Minneapolis, but just because I knew about 3 incidents that had taken place in that community, and the other student through TCO had no clue. I thought that would be a good thing to tell students to prepare them to go out. So. Well, thank you for coming, and if you have further questions, you have my email. You can look on the website. We have a copy of the book in the library. You can check it out, and I appreciate your attention and your time today. Both of us do. Thank you.